Welcome to Money Talks, a panel discussion exploring the art, symbolism, and the history behind banknotes. This discussion is organized as part of an exhibition that we have organized. It's in the upstairs of NGMA on the Dome on French banknote designs from around the world, curated by Rukmani Dahanukar. It's an exhibition that we have been working almost for 2 years, and it has already traveled to Pondicherry, Ahmedabad, Delhi, and now in Mumbai. In Mumbai, we have collaborated with the NGMA and Avid Learning. A couple of our partners are here to present the exhibition in Mumbai. It's been up from the 3rd of April and is on display till the 24th of April. So if you have not have a chance to look at the exhibition, please, after the discussion or until 24th, you're most welcome to visit and check the exhibition out. Now I'd like to invite Rukmini, who's the curator and also an independent collector, researcher of the exhibition. She'd be moderating the discussion.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Now, our esteemed panel, Dr. Himanshu Prabha Ray. She's the former chairperson of National Monuments Authority, Ministry of Culture, and professor at JNU. Next, we have Dr. Shailendra Bandare, assistant keeper, South Asian and Far Eastern numismatics and paper money collections at Ashmolean Museum. And we have Dr. Basil Sheikh, former secretary, Reserve Bank of India, and author with multiple publications. So, over to you, Rukmani. Have a great discussion, and yeah, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Firstly, thank you all for coming. I know this is a long weekend, and it's kind of hard to come out in the middle of a long weekend on an afternoon, which is quite warm, and to be here, so thank you. I have some really esteemed panelists, and all of them really good friends now. So I'm sure we'll have a really great presentation from each of them, and then a nice Q&A or a little bit of a discussion after. So without further ado, yes, I have to thank the National Gallery of Modern Art for hosting us, Alliance Française for believing in this project in the first place, and then wonderful experience of working on the traveling exhibitions with them, and Avid Learning, my distant partners. My parents, my dad is right here for always supporting all my dreams. And my really closest friend and business partner, Jigna, who's here, who's had to tolerate the back end of all these endeavors. And I think they all deserve a round of applause. So, I already spoke about what the exhibition was in the inauguration, and then I've been talking about it while doing the walkthroughs every day. And I said, you know what, I've got to turn it around a little differently. So basically, I'm going to come about with a different take on it. It's a story. So once upon a time, there were banknotes, and this is a story of banknotes. Now, we all know that they're a means, and they're a medium. And about 25 years ago, I started this research as part of my master's thesis. But until then, like most of us, I looked at banknotes like this, perhaps. The banknote's going to get me a nice French breakfast, maybe a croissant, maybe a cup of coffee. I mean, who has the time to look at what's on the banknote? It's what it's going to get me. Maybe go for a show. Maybe go for some indulgence and just shop. Or then maybe go for a higher indulgence and buy some luxury items. But then about 30 years ago, and almost 25 since I wrote my master's thesis, I came upon this cartoon in an article by The Guardian. And this was around the time that the euro was being launched across transnational Europe. And it got me thinking. It actually saved me, because it gave me this wonderful idea of writing a master's thesis on the subject, and then the rest is history. 20 years have gone by. I'm writing a book. It takes a while. I realized that when I started writing it. And this exhibition is a chapter that I would like to cover, which is the French banknote gallery, because I think that they're just really beautiful banknotes. And so for a change, let us look at the medium as the message, as Marshall McLuhan said. And let us look at what I feel as banknotes, not just merely as mediums of exchange, but also mediums of communication. And I'm going to run through a few of them. Some of them are French Bank of France prints. Some of them are actual Bank of France issues. And then you'll know what I'm saying. Anyway, the challenge has been that every day I'm saying the same thing, and some of you all have gone through my exhaustive, rather warm, I say warm because the air conditioning is a bit of an issue in the dome, but the whole curatorial walkthrough. So I said, instead of going back to the same story, let me present it differently. And this comes out of an experience of spending 2 weeks in the gallery, day in and day out, and meeting different people. I had the good fortune of having a walkthrough with kids from the JBCN school it was, yeah. And so they were third graders, 9 and 10 years of age. Believe me, they had questions before I'd even started. So it was really nice. And then, of course, all of you. And so with all my interactions during the walkthrough, I felt today I should present it slightly in a different manner. So for me, it's my passion project. And so when I look at it from that perspective, I feel there is a body as a concept. There's the mind with the curation and the soul with the design, because for me, design is everything, starting from what I do professionally and what I will be bringing forward in my book. So let's go with the first thing, the concept of the exhibition. So the first challenge is, of course, people are not looking at banknotes. Okay, now they're looking at them. But they are really pretty small. They fit in your wallets and in the size of your palm. So the first thing I did as a concept was to blow them up to at least 6 or 7 times their size. Because now each of us could appreciate them and see all the little details into them and look at them as artworks. Some of you have already seen the gallery upstairs. But the idea of then printing them on canvas was again to add to the fact that they would look like artworks. The medium of canvas is also really important, at least for me, because I felt that the banknote is made, unlike what most people say paper, it's cotton fiber. And so there's a texture to it, and the canvas as a medium lended the best or the closest representation of that. So, of course, I'd always, I don't know, most of you guys have seen it, otherwise I'll invite the rest of you all to see it upstairs. The second point was then, okay, how do I curate it? Because, I could go chronologically, but that's not how I'm even thinking about my book. I want to go thematically. I want to look at what it means to all of us as people who use these banknotes every day. And how, if we keep the croissant and the coffee aside, what else is in the banknote? I'd like to tell that story. And so there's a sense of relevance to the story. And so I said, okay, let me just look at some of the banknotes, and maybe they will guide me on how I would like to curate the story. Now here I've looked at French banknotes starting from the 40s, or I've represented them, 60s, 90s, until voila, we have the euro. So no more French banknotes now in anybody's wallets. They are with a few collectors, like myself and a few of us in the audience, or they are in museums and today, thankfully, in a modern art gallery. The only thing that's got some kind of relevance to the French nationalistic or the French Republic and those images are the reverse sides of the euro coins. And I have 2 on the right there because there was a redesign. So I've kind of curated my whole exhibition on these 3 images. And I don't want to take it further because you can obviously visit the gallery and there's more there. But then coming to the best part, which is the soul of the design. And here because it was very difficult for me to not look at this. I mean, I looked at all the French banknotes and I looked at how beautiful they were, at the same time how well they were designed. And I found 6 salient features or things or say maybe perspectives to look at all of them. One of them is the human form, how beautifully it's been depicted, and you see that across the gallery. The other is the use of bare, brash, bold images. The third one is banknote storyboards, where there is a connection between the images. They're not unrelated, not only on one side, but on both sides. The fourth is the front and back mirroring. Go back to the time of the 20s and the 30s, and this is in the 40s. Look at the details in terms of the engraving, and then just mirror images and the replication and the printing of them. The fifth is window dressing, which I thought was very cool. The way they had actually wrapped a design around a security feature, a watermark window. And so we see a lot of banknotes where the security is on one side and the art is on the other. But the French have kind of married the two together, and the form and the function or the essence of design really comes out on their banknote gallery. And of course, what is France without its fashion? So you will see across all of the banknotes, everybody very fashionably, tastefully dressed, including a lovely lion from the Sahara region on French West Africa. He looks like he's really had his mane blow-dried in a lovely salon. So go up and enjoy that after, of course, all my speakers are finished. In closing, I would like to say a quote about Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, who's also known as the author, famous for writing the story of the Le Petit Prince, or the Little Boy Prince, you can see on the last series of the banknotes. And I thought his quote really touched me because it kind of summarized what I felt. And I think it was kind of like a guiding light for me to curate this exhibition in this manner, and best explained as we see best only with the heart. And so, as you know, this is a major passion project for me. I really enjoyed myself. I loved it. I loved learning so many new things. And I hope that when you guys see the exhibition, you will feel a little part of what I felt in my heart. Thank you. So I'd like to invite Basil. Basil is a former employee of the Reserve Bank of India, but he has been instrumental in curating and setting up the museum, which is right about 2 kilometers away for the Reserve Bank. So I'm going to let Basil take the floor.
You know, Renuka has put in place an exhibition of notes, which have banknotes which have been issued in France and issued in colonies across the world. And what we will do right now would be, you know, just to get an idea. We will talk a little bit on the idea of banknotes, and we will also try and put these notes. We will try and look at the context and the canvas against which these notes were issued. That is one thing, and then we will also look at the notes which were issued in the Indo-French territories over there, and try and discern, try and see if we can get some insights into how the colonizer imagined, represented the people they colonized, the places, the people, the places, and the culture of the colonized. We'll see if we can just try and get some insights into that. First, you know, the idea of a banknote. Banknotes, the fascinating part of banknotes is that they straddle multiple dimensions. Okay? At one level, at the core of it, banknotes are money. They're essentially instruments of transactions, as Renuka had said, you know, good for croissant and coffee. And basically, it's in the realm of banking, economics, finance, commerce. Okay? At another level, they're also instruments of communication, in the sense that, you know, the intimacy of the note, virtually every person, you know, before the digital age, carried on their persons a banknote, and the sheer intimacy of it made it the communicator's ultimate fantasy. You know, and the communicator, the person who issued and manufactured the note, could project, the power, the glory, the values, or the official propaganda, whatever they wanted to put across, they could put it across over there, and you couldn't have an instrument more powerful and more effective than the banknote. And one interesting part about communications is also there is the idea of intended messages, what the issuer is actually wanting to say, and also about unintended messages in the sense that, how is it perceived and how is, the transmitted and the received. That becomes another play which becomes interesting. And thirdly, the idea of a banknote is they are also works of art. As Rukmini had said, that it's the most transacted work of art is a banknote, and the artist's challenge, while it is the fantasy and delight of a communicator, it is a huge challenge to the artist in the sense that you have to compress within a very, very tiny format. You have to try compress security elements. You have to compress, the elements that go into a banknote. But more difficult than that is how do you convert an abstract idea into a visual recognition? How do you reify value? How do you reify the nation? How do you look at the nation and the colonies? So this is what makes a banknote different from any other piece of art, since we are the NGMA over here. And we just can't, just a minute or two, banknotes are money. And the idea of money has changed over a period of time. It has changed from the concrete to the abstract. It has moved from the real to the symbolic to the imaginary. What is money today? Money today is essentially some sort of a made-up fiction. It's a shared fiction. So it is squarely in the realm of the imaginary, whether you take the rupee or the dollar or the euro. Today, it is essentially an abstract concept, an abstract unit of account. But along this trajectory, banknotes happened to be a part as the idea of money moved from the real coins to the symbolic banknotes to an imaginary fiat or crypto money around. Banknotes are a part of this continuum. So this is just putting banknotes in context. Now we come to the French banknotes. Okay, how did it all start? So it all started, of course, with the power and the glory and the splendor and the extravagance and the wars of the Sun King. Now, in order to have the extravagance and to have wars, what happens is that you build up debt. And France, at the end of, I think, Louis XIV died in 1717, and France inherited a huge sum of debt around over there. This is a thing from Piketty's, a thing on inequality book around over there. Almost 50% of the GDP constituted national debt. Now, if there's an economist over here, they'll say, 50% is nothing. Today, India has about 80%, and the US is about 123%. But there's a huge difference over there. This was real money. Today, we live in a world of fiat currency. So the debt was a huge amount, and this debt was inherited by the boy king, Louis XIV, who in turn was represented, who had the regent. I think he was the Duke of Orleans. Now, they were in a problem. Now, what happens is the irony of irony is that who comes to the rescue of France is an Englishman. Okay, so an Englishman, or rather to be more precise, a Scotsman comes to the rescue when the trade deficits, you're drained of gold and silver, money is scarce. This gentleman, now who's this gentleman over here? This gentleman is a philanderer, he's a duelist, he's a gambler, he's an economist, he's a genius, he's a mathematician, and he goes around to set up the Banque Royale, which became a precursor to the central bank. He also went on to become France's Controller General of Finance. He established the French Bourse, presided over one of the biggest bull runs and iconic bull runs in history, which is, we will come to the textbook examples at a later point. And the story of John Law is, well, it starts with the lady. There's the lady, incidentally, Elizabeth Villiers, also happened to be the mistress of William III of France. And, well, there were two people who disputed over the affections. There was a duel. He killed the person around. He was sentenced. He was in prison. He ran away from prison and became a fugitive. And in the process, ran off to Amsterdam, gambled his way to a fortune, and sort of won the confidence of the French regent who was the Duke of Orleans. And something very interesting, nothing to do with the notes over here, is that it's about identities. In those days, perhaps class identities transcended those of nationality and others. And interestingly, I think there's the film, The Grand Illusion, where again this topic is raised. Do class identities transcend national identities? And what is the rescue? He says, well, if there's no money, let them have notes. So he went around and established the Banque Generale, went into a host of financial engineering, which we will not get into over here. He issued banknotes against the debt, also got into debt equity swaps, issued equity of the bank which he had. The prices went up, everybody was very happy, national debt reduced. Then the Banque Generale was converted into the National Bank. It became the Banque Royale. Okay, and please correct my pronunciations because I do not know French, so I'll be happy to be corrected. So he established the French boss, and there was a good party which went on. And what they did was they also gotten into the Mississippi scheme, the French territories. They said that the East India Company and the Dutch East India Company are making enormous profits out of their trade with the East. So he says, well, France has territories in America, so with the trade with the West, so the expected returns on trade with Louisiana and America will back the notes rather than gold and silver. So that was the sort of a financial engineering. And, he also was an author. It was not just, it wasn't just an heir. And, the idea was that money is a creative force and, more money will stimulate production. And if gold was scarce, you create notes. And, if you don't have bread, you have cake. And then, it will. But it is not with this exact, it's not really, there is a lot of sound logic to what he says, only the implementation often goes wrong. The implementation went wrong. The Mississippi bubble was called out, and the shares crashed. The money became worthless, and there was total disaster. And it has gone in as a cautionary tale of speculative mania, unregulated financial practices, and over-reliance and unregulated innovation, financial innovation. So, where history is concerned, is he a rogue or is he a genius who blew the lab? It's not very. You don't have a definitive answer to this. And anybody who's interested in this, there's a fascinating book called Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. Very, very, very relevant today over there. So you can, and it was written about 100 years ago. Charles Mackay. Okay. Then for 50 years, or for more than 50 years, the confidence in the banking and financial system was zero. It's only after the revolution, again they had a problem. They said, what do we do? Well, dig out the ideas of John Law, and what they did was confiscated church properties, confiscated royal properties, and issued notes not against gold and silver, not against metal and bullion, but against the properties. So it's notes issued, assignats were issued. But the same story, they got overissued, and then there was a bubble, and then there was the collapse, and there was chaos. Then came the First Council, and established the Banque de France, and the idea was to restore confidence in the French banking system, and sort of settle the upheavals of the revolutionary period. And till today, Banque de France serves as the central bank of the country. So, in sum, French banknotes were issued first by Banque Generale, then by Banque Royale, then by the National Assembly. Then after that was Banque de France. Now, France was also a colonial country. Now, for the colonies, a host of banks were established to issue notes for the colonies. And one of them was the Indochine, which issued notes in India, for French India. That is for Pondicherry, Chandanagar, Karaikal, and one or two other places. And this is the former head office of the bank. And in case anybody visits Pondicherry, please go to the UCO Bank over there. Now, the UCO Bank in Pondicherry, this is the photograph of the UCO Bank, was where the office of the bank, Indochine, was located. And you have the French in India. We won't get into the issue of the French in India. There was the Dupleix, Clive. There was the rivalry. Ultimately, in 1763, they were left with very, very, very little territories, which were not very significant. These were the French establishments in India. Ultimately, they were transferred de facto in 1954. But now about the notes over there. This is the office, a sort of a Saracenic French which is still existing, which is now today the UCO Bank building. And the Bank Indochine was established in 1875. Pondicherry branch opened in 1877. And one thing, what they did was they issued what were known as omnibus notes. Omnibus notes were not notes particular, the designs, not the notes. The designs of the notes were sort of common designs. The same sort of designs were issued in various regions, etc. And so whether it was Vietnam, Cambodia, India, the designs were more or less, sometimes the designs were the same. And what we mean by omnibus is here, you have the same design note, but one is issued in rupees. And this is the Pondicherry Chandanagar. These are the ones which are issued, in issued in Southeast Asia. And I think this note, if I'm not mistaken, Rukmini, it's over here. It's over here. And this business, I think, will you be talking about, so Shailendra will take us, will tell you about how the notes had the name of the artist, and whether it was the artist and whether he did the definitive design and the engraver, etc. So all this we will not get into. But one observation that we can make over here is that French notes privilege the artist over the corporation that manufactured the notes. If you take, the British notes, typically you will have, I think Kishore Bhai is here. He's the, he's the fountainhead of all knowledge about notes over there. Shailendra is there. He and Shailendra were instrumental in moving matters. But typically the notes had Bradbury Wilkinson, or it would be Waterloo and Company, or it would be whoever is the company. Here it would be the artists, not the corporation. So perhaps value you can look at. Now, one of the early notes that was issued was the 10 rupee note over here, and it was a note in blue. Now, the blue was not really an aesthetic choice. Apart from aesthetics, it was also a security feature in the sense that there were advances in photography that were happening, and it was felt that it was more difficult to reproduce blue notes rather than other notes. And what is the motive that we have over here? We'll have a Poseidon with Cetus over here, the ugly creature on which Poseidon is resting. So these are essentially nautical allegories over there. And from the issuer perspective, it's sort of rooted in ideas of mercantilism, trade, the sea connected the various colonies. And so you have these nautical allegories over here. But from the user perspective, so we can understand the issuer perspective in having Poseidon and Cetus on the banknotes. But from the user perspective, I mean, in Pondicherry, how many people could relate to it is anybody's question. And Pondicherry had remained away from commercial and economic activity in some ways. But these allegories were also, interestingly, these mercantilism and nautical allegories can also be seen on Portuguese notes. So here again you have Cetus, the creature over here, along with the sea nymph, similar renditions. So the tones which you can see, and interestingly, Cetus is also a constellation. Now it's about imagination. Earlier, this constellation was known as Cetus. Today, they more call it the Whale because it depends on imagination. This is the old imagination. This is the new. It's all about the mind, how the mind goes. Again, this is the Blue series. And then you have another note over here. This is the 50 rupee note. Now, interestingly, this note was by two artists. It was by Brantôme and by Duval. It was designed by them. Of course, the engraver was somebody else. Now, what is interesting about this is that, you have the personification. So France is personified as the lady over here, and she's nestling with a bull. And you have the colony. Because you can't say India, because the same note was also issued in Southeast Asia, so Indochina or whoever, the colony, along with the tiger. Okay, so these are female personifications. So you are making an abstract idea into something concrete, and this was the way they did it. And despite the introduction of many sort of Indo-Chinese motifs on the note, the visual language which the note spoke was largely, Greco-Roman. So it was more, so it was sort of a state, Greco-Roman state. But what is more important over here is the way they have, the equality part of it, that the colonizer and the colonized have been viewed more or less, given a sort of an equal, they're treated with some degree of equality. Now, the question is whether it was sort of a part of the celebration of French values, or can it be viewed as an artist's subtle resistance to oppression and colonialism? It's introduced in a subtle way as art as resistance, or is it, has the artist smuggled this in, or is it done? We don't know, but these are questions. But this is you can appreciate this only when you view this against something else that was there and present. And here's the Bank of Bengal note, and here you can see you have Britannia and you have the native. And the native is supine, offering a cornucopia of things to Imperial Britannia. So, so there is a marked difference between these, the imagination of the native. But this was the French imagination in one of the notes. Now, whether it happened in practice or not is a different issue, but at least and here you have a bare-breasted native, which is, sort of at the feet of the imperial power. And you had, European and other Oriental elements in the note. Then came the First World War. How were we running for time? Huh? Half time. Okay. More or less. We had the First World War. First World War was, there was the scarcity of silver. Silver prices rose. They very often went over the price of the metal. And you had both India and a whole host of countries issued small denomination notes. Means the base denomination, the core denomination, was issued as a note rather than as a coin. Over here. And these were the notes issued in the French settlements in Pondicherry shortly after the war. And here you have the very celebrated sort of visualization of Marianne. Marianne becomes the personification of France, and typically it was as a peasant woman, but here maybe because of Shelliter may know better, because of the war perhaps, she was as an aggressive Marianne with a helmet and, looking formidable and ready to go. And this is by Charles Walhan. It's celebrated. It was also used in, I think, in the 5-franc note. This was used. And this was, I think, Charles Walhan, and this was the engraver, Deloche, how do you pronounce it? Deloche. Okay, and you can see the names of in the notes. Below the notes, you have the names of the artists are present, and of course the language panel over here. And then was the 5-rupee note, which was issued, which we have seen already as the omnibus note. Now here the interpretation is not too clear. We are not even too clear whether is this Marianne. Perhaps Marianne, a helmeted Marianne, but the catalogs put it as a woman with a helmet. That's the way the catalogs put it, and she's holding the spear. So, and she's holding a spear, and perhaps there is also an, the olive leaves are over there. It's now what is very clear is where Britannia is concerned, this imagery is exceedingly clear and explicit. This is an image of Britannia. In one hand, she holds the olive leaf, and in the other hand, she holds the spear, either war or peace. But peace on terms, on whose terms? That's a different thing. So it was ostensibly, the ostensible duality of the spear and the olive leaf was very clear and seen in British notes. But this, we are not very sure about what the interpretation of Marianne over here is. And you can also see the difference also, one is a very, very formal sort of formal, elegant setting. The other is more artistic and free-flowing. It's sort of a different use. And here is the reverse of the note. The reverse of the note, mainly these notes were prevalent in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Cambodia, etc. So you have the image, the artist's representation of a native woman and the place, maybe the Angkor Wat over here. And sometimes, that Sébastien Lorrain, his notes very often, they also have what they call the physiognomy notes, meaning they depict the picture of the native. Yeah, I'm done. Okay, so these were various representations of Marianne, which we had. This 50 rupee notes was more or less, more a Chinese sort of visual. And the reverse was Duplay. Duplay was, we had the fight between Duplay and Fife, the Carnatic Wars, which were there on the 50 rupee note issued in Pondicherry. And the final words over here, where arts and designs are concerned, French notes explicitly credited designers and artists. Then accepted conventions of note design were often changed by people like, say Sébastien Lorrain. Whereas here you have, the very formal designs. Here you have a slightly more. Both are very beautiful and artistic, but you can see that one is more heart and the other is more mind. And where communications is concerned, the French scene was more of a mixed bag, in the sense that some were beautifully conveyed in terms of equality of the colonized and the colonized, but did it really relate to the users? That is a big question mark. And where transaction instruments were concerned, I think to the practical people who used it in India and Pondicherry, these notes were more sort of practical means of communications with exotic motives. So that's where we sort of look at it. And this is that book, which incidentally is a very interesting book if anybody wants Extraordinary Popular Delusions on the Madness of Crowds, which gives this. Thank you very much.
Shailendra, the floor is yours. Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Rukmini, for this. So I'm going to sort of expand a little bit on what Basil was saying in terms particularly about the visuality of French colonial banknotes. Last year I curated a major exhibition at the Ashmolean, which was coincidentally called Money Talks as well. And this was nothing to do with Rukmini. It's our own focus group audience which came up with that title. And it was, it was just a pure coincidence. But while I was working on them, I was very, very keen to bring into a decolonial slant on some of the banknotes' visuality aspects. And then I chose some of these banknotes, particularly the French colonial banknotes, but mainly in Africa, not so much about India. And I was very glad that Banque de France actually sent us. They were our lenders, and they collaborated with us, and they sent us some exceedingly beautiful artwork. So here we go. It's all right. Okay. So as Basil had said. France was a colonial power, and banknotes in such wonderful words, they're sort of means of communication. So they also offer us a window, which is interestingly a rectangular window as well in terms of shape, to view what the communication strategies were and how did these designs were chosen, what was chosen to be depicted. And there is, of course, as you can imagine, a very interesting correspondence and to and fro between what does the money show and who actually controls it and how it is transmitted. So I mean, we said we are used to the saying that the sun never set on British Empire. The sun nearly did not even set on French Empire as well, because they had colonies not as massive as Britain, but in all parts of the world. But the bulk, as you can see from this map, the bulk was in Africa. So that's where the most concentration of French imperial presence were. And this was quite interesting because Africa as a continent, before the advent of colonialism, which happened in the late 19th century, as some of you might be aware of, that there was a conference called at Berlin by various European powers, and then they apportioned the continent of Africa between themselves, which is famously known as the grab of Africa or the scramble for Africa. And after that, there was a much wider presence in the continent of Africa. So before this colonial presence, Africa had a very unique and interesting, to say the least, monetary culture of its own, because there was no modern money in Africa before that. It was no coins and banknotes, but they were using a whole range of objects like this. And these objects, as you can imagine, there is this horseshoe-shaped brass object called manila, which was in sort of what is today is Nigeria. You have salt next to it, which was used in sub-Saharan Africa. What is next to that is the last slide on the top there, is a set of gold weights. They're not made of gold, they were used to weigh gold dust, which then subsequently was used in transaction. You have cloth, you have beads, you have wrought iron, and of course in the center you have the ubiquitous cowrie shells. So there's a whole range of monetary objects that were being used by various populations and various cultures in the entire over the entire African continent. And this was a very unique way of transaction, the transactionality of these objects was very complicated. It was deeply rooted in their society, in their culture, in their language. So, and it was also multivalent. So, if you want to go and, get married, for bridal payment, you would use one object, but if you want to go and buy a cow, you would use something else. And how the bridal money and cow money were equivalent was a different ball game, and how those kind of equivalences were achieved was a different ball game. So what happens after colonialism comes to Africa is that this whole culture is very severely interrupted, and the colonialists, be it French, Portuguese, British, whoever, because their main intention is to achieve fiscal extraction from colonies, they issue modern style banknotes and coins there. And as a result of that, this entire culture that was surrounding the anthropological use of these objects vanishes or is challenged in many ways. It doesn't completely vanish, it sort of, is disrupted badly. So with that sort of backdrop, we have to approach money particularly in colonial Africa, but also in other parts of various empires you must imagine that money is also a very disruptive force. It's not unifying, it's not homogenizing, but it also disrupts. It's a violent force that causes some degree of violence against the colonized populations. So how was money managed in Africa, particularly in the paper money in Africa, and particularly when we come to France, is some of it was covered by Basel. So there was the mother bank, which is in the metropole, the mother country, which is France, and it was the Banque de France. And there were also various subsidiary banks, which were different for regions across the globe, with their own treasury and issue offices. So this is how the monetary management was done. We've already seen Indochina, they had Banque de l'Indochine. In the West Africa and Equatorial Africa, we have Banque de l'Afrique Occidentale. In North Africa, we had different individual banks. There was Bank Sharifien, which was in Morocco, in Bank of Algeria, Bank of Tunisia, and also Syria and Lebanon, which were part of the French mandate after the First World War. So they had their own bank as well. And barring that, out of Africa, in West Indies and Indian Ocean and Pacific, there were other banking organizations, other subsidiary banks. And they were also managed through various offices called Institut d'émission and also Caisse Centrale d'Outre-mer. So these were the bodies that were mainly regulating the issues, and those were the bodies, apart from the Banque de l'Indochine that Basil talked about, they also had these omnibus issues that we talked about. That basically the design is the same, but the issue offices, the names of the issue offices change, and that's how you know that these notes belong to those, they were issued in those countries. And currently, you have also the IEDOM, the Institut d'émission des Départements d'Outre-mer, which is basically the body that regulates currency affairs. Now, of course, it's all euro, but still the currency affairs of French departments outside France are regulated through here. And as Basil very nicely pointed out, that the agency dedicated to banknote design, particularly in France, was actually celebrating the artist. And this is where, fortunately for us, we have names of artists which are mentioned in the sort of at the very low end of the panels. And the names have different titles after their names, and they are sort of the designations for the role that artists played in making of that note. So you have Invenit, and these are kind of Latin abbreviations. And it's very, very interesting that these abbreviations actually come from the art of the medal. So when people were making medals, those were the kind of the vocabulary that was used in medal making was then adopted to these particular endeavors. So if it is mentioned as Invenit, the original artist, Delineavit, which is the producer of the definitive sketch of the design, Sculpsit, which was the engraver of the plate or any other medium of printing, Fecit, or he made it, was a very broad term, which means that one artist had the role of everything, including creating the original design and also creating the most definitive sketch. So this is perhaps one of the unique aspects of French banknotes, that the artistic agency is very clearly defined by this, and therefore we can know actually who these people were and what they were up to, and then track down the design histories and the artistic inputs of these various designs. Historically, as we saw in some of Basil's presentation, the designs were pretty much straightforward. I mean, these are all basically 19th century designs. We saw the Poseidon and how this kind of designs were rooted in classical Greco-Roman allegories rather than actual somebody depicting somebody in real life. These are allegorical figures. And even when you have a reference to someone who's real in, say, for example, the Bank of Senegal note that you see at the right, up at the top, has medallions showing some exoticized imagery of the colonized people. But that is also not terribly real. It is based on some sort of reality. And of course, there is an element of exoticism that is apparent immediately after that. So it's all about exoticizing the other. The colonized people were already being seen as someone who were exotic in that respect. And you have other instruments to suggest a particular colonial connection because, for example, cash crops, which were very much a part of the extractive mechanism of colonialism. So, for example, in West Africa, in Senegal, there are indications of sugarcane plantations. So that is something which is very much part of the fiscal landscape of which is in there. This thing in the early 20th century was changed mainly by Luc Olivier Merson, and he was the main person who created a design shift in terms of his banknote designs. And you can see that these are very much Art Nouveau. They are very much speaking to the realm in which he's working. He's even equally more famous for the stamp design, which is called a Merson key type. Whoever is collecting stamp here would recognize that is where you see the word post in the panel. that was the space where different countries' names appeared. And this was almost like a stamp omnibus issue in the kind of equivalent of banknotes in the same fashion. And you can see that it was his work on creating these designs which was really very different than what you saw in the previous slide. They're colorful, they have a very typical palette of pastel colors that he uses, and also the emphasis on allegories and representation is very much then made into a realistic form. They are very much real. And it was two of his proteges that created their imprint in colonial French money. And one of them was Maurice Sébastien Laurent. And this is a classic example, one of his French banknotes that he designed. And you can see that there is a stylization of this figure, which is probably a victory-related figure. And you have, you're sort of looking her on the face, you have her looking to the right, on the back, you have exactly looking to the left. So there is this, the simplistic sort of juxtaposition kind of thing in design to bring out art. But Maurice Sébastien Laurent, in 1935 onwards, started designing banknotes for one of the colonial banks, and that was the French West African Bank, Banque de l'Afrique Occidentale. And this is where he first time brought in extremely realistic depictions of the colonized people. And you can see the exoticism that you saw which was going on in the allegorical fashion or suggestive fashion in the earlier notes has become extremely real here. And he chooses them to be, very interestingly, he chooses his subjects to directly look outwards. So when we look at the banknotes, the subject also looks at us. So this is a very, very unique design aspect that he introduced in this. And obviously you can see that, they are bare-breasted, they are convivial, they are familial, they are bucolic, they're sort of doing their own things. And also there is a certain degree of equipoise. The status of the colonized people in the French Empire was actually French. They did not have any legislative representation, but they were thought to be equally as French as the French, sort of French, native French from the metropole. And here again, you can see that the central figure is a white woman figure, which is Ceres, the goddess of agriculture, but she is kind of embracing these native women from Africa in a sort of very convivial manner. And the echoes of classicism, or Greco-Roman style, are still very much apparent, because on the reverse you see a woman carrying a palm frond, which has echoes with the Greek goddess Nike. She also carries a palm frond, and the man is playing a lute, which has echoes with the Greek god Apollo. So that is those kind of dialogues between the classical training of these artists are very much apparent in this. Laurent also designed notes for the Bank of Indochina, where he chose different ethnic communities from the East, much as he saw them in Africa. He chose these Vietnamese and Annamese local sort of people and their landscapes into his designs. Frontality is very, very much a part of Laurent's design, and here we have again a beautiful, more or less Art Nouveau representation of this, goddess, which is kind of nature goddess, carrying this Nike, the goddess of Minerva in her hand, goddess of victory, Nike in her hand, and to juxtapose with the frontality of the woman, allegorical figure, you have the frontality of an actual heritage structure at the back. So this balances itself in a very interesting way. One is kind of ethereal, beautiful, imaginative. The second is very much set in the colonial sort of landscape context. The second designer, after whom was also a disciple of Luc Olivier Merson, was Henri Clément Serveau. And this is, again, one of his 5,000 franc banknotes designed for France, National Bank de France design. And here you see a kind of representations of the colonized people, but done in a kind of a racial style. So you have a black person, a yellow person, and an Arab, and which is all being sort of looked brought under the wing of the French mother figure. So this particular role of France as the mother country is very much accentuated in here. And Clément Cerveau was also, interestingly, was the first designer to actually incorporate elements of African art into his African banknotes. So here we have these wonderful depictions, which is, there is a mask, which is from the African artistic tradition, juxtaposing with an African colonized person. And again, on the back also, there is this woman sort of ruefully looking into the future, as it were. And besides it, there is the piece is a bronze piece of jewelry from West African cultures. The frontality that was introduced by Sébastien Laurent is actually also visible in some of Clément Cerveau's work as well. So this is a very short skip because we didn't have a lot of time here to give you a flavor of the designer's input into the art of French as well as French colonial banknotes. So to conclude, as I said, the colonial intervention brought together homogenization of African money and elsewhere as well, at the cost of disrupting the traditional monetary culture in different regions of Africa as well as the other French empire, and disturbing social, economic, and cultural networks. The art of African colonial money offered us unique insights in colonial visual culture, what was happening around it, and it is directly responsible for the choice and evolution in visuality of colonial money. As we saw, the very nature of these objects offers us a glimpse or a window into the artistic agency and its role in identifying these tropes, of how these artists were engaging with all this. And of course, you get this idea that Africa or any other parts of the world are primitive, wild, distant, exotic continents with colonization often is shown as bringing in modernity and emancipation, and and as we saw in the case of Laurent's design, the Africans looked as if they were rather enjoying the colonial experience rather than being exploited out of it. So people were often shown as benefiting from the colonial experience and exoticized and objectified, engaging in exploitative mechanisms of colonial project. And there is this interesting visual othering between the French and the other populations. And it happens on various levels, spatial in terms of space, racial, demographic, and also economic. So that's where I would end. Congratulations to Rukmini for bringing us this wonderful show. And I really enjoyed, African money is not really my area of specialism, but I really enjoyed learning about this. Firstly, as part of my own present exhibition that was earlier last year, and then subsequently having discussions with Rukmini on this subject as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shailendra. Yeah. And now for the grand finale, we have Dr. Himanshu Prabhare. The one special thing about Himanshu is, which I noticed, when I was going, I Googled her, and then of course we spent a lot of time together and it was lovely. But she has one special connection to our country, our nation. She's born on the same day that India got independent.
Not fair.
Sorry, I gave up her age, but I think it's really special because she is really something, I think she's a nation's pride, so I'm glad she's born on the same day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted and pleased to be here, but let me warn you, I'm neither a banker nor a numismatist. I'm a historian and archaeologist, and my passions are, as you can see, Asian heritage and maritime networks. And I'm really, really thankful to Rukmini for opening this new window, this new world of banknotes, to me. And I've had this with both Sanjay Garg and Shailendra Bhandare, coins going back and forth, but largely as a historian and as an archaeologist. But banknotes is a completely different ball game for me. So I'm looking at a very different perspective, and this perspective is as a historian. and as somebody who studies Southeast Asia and India's connections with Southeast Asia. Something which I find fascinating, we've looked at West Africa, but if you look at the Indian Ocean, that's the French colonies in India, Indochina, and then, of course, the Indian Ocean, Mauritius, and the various islands, Seychelles, so on and so forth, Djibouti as well. And if I were to actually plot them on a map, I was trying to look for a map which would show me the routes. Unfortunately, I didn't get one, but if you actually plot them in the map, starting from Djibouti, which is in the Horn of Africa's mouth of the Red Sea, coming all the way up to Indochina, Vietnam, and the East, this is a route which goes back to the first centuries and even earlier, first century CE at least. So we're looking at a very ancient connection, right? But we're also looking at data which is not that ancient, and which really comes from the 19th and 20th century. So it fascinates me that it's what gets prominence here is Indochina. There are two things which I would like to highlight. The term Indochina itself, and I'll come to that in a moment. We don't call that region Indochina anymore, but that is how it was known in the 19th and 20th century. So what does this term mean, Indochina? Secondly, are we looking at that as the central place? It would seem that the French certainly were looking at this whole space through a lens focused on Indochina, and that has very good reasons why they were doing that. It's not sort of random, it's not arbitrary. So, as was pointed out by my esteemed panelists, by Basil, that it's the Bank of Indochina, which was really issuing banknotes for many of the colonies in the Indian Ocean, and I've said New Caledonia, French Polynesia, Djibouti, and so on. The dates are given for when the 1891 to 1908, when Djibouti was also, the bank was also established an office in Djibouti. This is something which I find fascinating. It was shown by Shailendra. I have labeled it the message for the colony. To me, it certainly is a message for the colony in many, many ways. What you see is it was issued in 1944. The issuer was the French settlements of Oceania. We see a woman on the top with a wreath, and she's holding a small figure of Athena, the Greek goddess of war and wisdom. I find the connection and this juxtaposition of one goddess, both for war and wisdom, as extremely fascinating. Are we looking at weaponizing knowledge production? Are we looking at the intellectual roots of colonialism? So there are a lot of questions when I look at this banknote which come to my mind. And certainly the Greek, we've seen Greek iconology in both the earlier presentations, but why Greek? Where is that coming from? And why suddenly are the Europeans discovering their Greek roots? And there's a whole literature on that, which I don't want to go to. Okay, so that is one. So certainly the root of all civilization, if we are looking at the 19th century, as evident in the literature that is produced, is Greece. Rome comes up slightly later, and in India, somewhat in a later period. The second point is that if we look at the reverse, and this again, Shailendra showed it just now, is the temple at Bayon in Cambodia, in Angkor. The image is that it's a Buddhist temple, right? It's not a Hindu temple. Angkor is Hindu. This is a Buddhist temple, and the image is that of Avalokiteshvara. Where is Buddhism coming into this whole story? So we have a mix. We have the Greek civilization coming in, which is the Ur civilization or the origin civilization spreading across the world, and then we have Bayon being taken up. So how do we read this? And this is not just something which is which sort of is restricted to the Eastern Indian Ocean or to Southeast Asia or to Indochina, but is all the way to Djibouti. You remember my maritime route, which goes all the way to the Red Sea. And we have the same motif, which is across the entire Indian Ocean spectrum. So I said the term Indochina is an early 19th century term. And why did it come about? Why was the region called Indochina? Because it was firmly believed at that time. We are talking about cultural diffusion. It was believed that culture traveled through other regions. And just like the Greek culture was the origin culture of the Europeans, but it was brought by the Europeans to India. And the Indians and it was brought as a result of Alexander's invasion, 4th, 3rd centuries BC, and I can go on and on about that on another day. But so just like Greek culture civilized and brought different kinds of architecture to India, Indian culture went to Southeast Asia and was responsible for the monuments and the heritage that was constructed in Southeast Asia. And the other influence came from China. So as it lies between India and China, the region was known as Indochina. This has larger implications. And one, of course, was the figure of Alexander looming large, not just in our history, but across the board. And of course, we often forget that that's an image which is also in Persian literature, but that again goes somewhere else, so I don't want to take it up. But my last point, and this again is a very interesting point, because if you look at how it was presented, or the chair was presented, the French chair of Indology in Paris, it was called Histoire the Monde l'Inde. Now, the point is, monde and the N is really a term which is translated into English as Greater India. This was not whether this was how the French perceived it, but the entire, and there's again a whole lot of writings on Greater India, how the Indians perceived Greater India, how the French archaeologists were writing about Southeast Asia, and how this term really takes roots. But at the bottom of all this, at the bottom of this Indochina, the Indo-Chinese civilization, was the monument of Angkor. Remember, the French lost India to the British, and they lost all their monuments. But the famous monument and the most important monument in Indochina was Angkor, which was really the jewel in the French crown. And in the 19th century, starting from 1860s, the French, we often use the term discovered, but nothing was ever discovered. It was always there. The natives or the local people knew about it. It's just that it was written in European languages in the 19th century and so brought to the attention of Europe. So the naturalist Henri Maude, he wrote about the architecture of Angkor, and he really brought this to the attention of Europeans. In 1866, this was also, it was both ways. It was the finding of monuments, but it was also looking for trade routes and looking for economic transactions. And so 1866 is the French Mekong expedition looking for the route from Cambodia into China, into Yunnan and into China. And as a result of these expeditions, as a result of these writings, in 1873, Louis de la Porte, he led an archaeological mission to Bayonne, which I've just mentioned. And there was a large collection of Khmer art which was made in Cambodia. And this art can still be seen in the Guimet, in the Musée Guimet, which has the largest collection of art from Southeast Asia in Europe. These are some of this is taken from Michael Falzer's book on Angkor, which talks about the discovery of Angkor. And you see the discoverers and, visiting the site, the colonial officials, the French colonial officials. On the other side, you can see a raft and an image of the Buddha, which is being transported. the sculptures that were transported were huge, and so it certainly required a lot of effort and energy to take this across. But certainly what it did was that it brought these images to the attention of Europe. And there were major exhibitions which were held in Europe in which, the colonial powers, including Britain, they participated. And Britain, of course, presented monuments from India. But for the French, it was Angkor, which was the monument, which was, the heritage structure that was to be preserved and was to be kept. So of the Angkor, as I pointed out, 9th to 12th century, it's a huge site. It's not one single structure. It's a huge site. There are a lot of monuments there. Why did they choose the Bayon, which I've shown you earlier on the banknote? And is there a reason for that? There are at least two reasons. Buddhism by the 19th and early 20th century had become an international religion and had been accepted as an international religion. And so Buddhism had its own attraction. But the other reason is that by the time the French were in Cambodia or in Indochina, the local population was Theravada Buddhist and not Hindu. And so the monuments were worshipped as Buddhist monuments, and Bayon, of course, is of course the only temple, the Buddhist temple, which was built, and you see the image of the Buddha on the other side, and hence it's not surprising that of all these monuments, they would choose Bayon for their banknotes. This continues. I mean, the Cambodians now use Angkor on the banknotes. So the tradition of using these sites has continued, but Angkor today, of course, is a World Heritage Site, and it's a huge site and is one of the prides of Cambodia, not Indochina, as we saw it earlier. There's another aspect to the whole Indian Ocean tradition, which is boats. We saw one or two in Basil's presentation earlier. But what I found quite interesting and quite surprising is the detail that we see, and the attention to detail that we see to boats in these banknotes. We saw this as well, the Djibouti banknote earlier. You see the image of which is normally referred to as a dhow, but we need to be very careful. It is a country boat, but it's a traditional boat, I would say. And on the top, what one sees are the outriggers. Outriggers, again, are these two balancing boards which are used, and are very characteristic of Southeast Asia. So my question is this just a representation of the routes that we saw earlier? Was there any French interest in the Indian Ocean? But more importantly, was there any French interest in the traditional boats of the Indian Ocean? And I think a person who wrote a great deal about it, and I think is a valuable source of traditional boats, is Admiral Paris. And he was a naval admiral. He traveled across the Indian Ocean all the way up to China. And this, of course, is a representation of a boat on which he is seen drawing what he saw. But you have in the museum in Paris, and of course his volumes are published, what one sees is a very detailed documentation of traditional boats and traditional watercraft of the Indian Ocean. Now, certainly Admiral Paris was not the only one who was doing it. The British were also doing it. The British were also interested in the fisheries, and James Arnell and others are important people who document traditional boats. But what is absolutely fascinating about Admiral Paris's drawings are the scale drawings that he made, the different kinds of boats that he drew all across the Indian Ocean, and the fact that if we compare, we often tend to use traditional boats as a sort of shorthand term for kind of watercraft which did not change over time. But the point I'm making is that if we look at the banknotes more carefully, if we sort of tie them up or compare them with the publications that came up at the same point in time, what we see are not just diversity in the both types, but changes over time. So the banknotes, on the one hand, while they give us a colonial gaze, and while certainly they also create a different intellectual landscape, which we all live in, and perhaps at some point need to move beyond, but they also provide us with information which helps us map what traveled across the Indian Ocean, not just on banknotes, but also through drawings and and writings of all these people who traveled. And my final point, and this is especially for Rukmini, because, so what am I saying this for? I mean, what is the point? Yes, there are heritage structures, there are, World Heritage Sites, there's the Indian Ocean, so where are we going from here? And how do we connect these? These are all World Heritage Sites, which I've plotted. We all look at World Heritage Sites through the national lens. So India has, I think, 40, I'm not quite sure of the figure anymore, but I think more than 40 World Heritage Sites. But if you actually plot them, a lot of them are coastal. So what are they doing, looking at the ocean? Did they actually talk to each other, or, they're just there because it's nice, to see the ocean from the World Heritage Site? I think there are larger issues that we need to take forward. And one of these is how do we sort of blend heritage, maritime mobility, and banknotes to talk about what was happening, what is the larger picture that we need to think about. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Himanshu, for that. But you've slightly sent a message out to everyone that we have something else in mind, and hopefully it'll see the light of day, and we'll soon sail it out into the Indian Ocean, and all of us can enjoy this next project as well. Yadu, over to you. Thank you for patiently waiting, and thank you, each of you, for coming all the way to Mumbai. They've not from the sea, but by flight and by road, but they've all been here. And I really appreciate the fact that you guys are here with me today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rukmini. So I'd just like to, once again thank all our esteemed panelists, Dr. Sheikh, Dr. Bandare, and Dr. Ray. And of course, Rukmini for connecting and weaving it all together in the framework of this exhibition. And thanks to NGMA, Nidhi ma'am, Shruti ma'am, the exhibition team, the organizing team, who have also been with us through the course of 2 weeks, 3 weeks almost, with building this exhibition. And also our partners, Avid Learning, Dhwani, Rajvizya, and Sagar, for helping us with reaching out to more people and bringing all of you together to this space. And thank you, all of you also, for taking your time out on a Saturday between a long weekend and to, come and stay with us. So thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
So we can start with around the room. You'll have to move the mic around. But I would just request to make the questions really brief and focused. And then if you'd like to ask it to a specific person on the panel, that's fine. Or then we'll decide who'll take it. Thank you.
My name is Anant, and my question is for Basil, also all the panel. Do you know if the notes printed in Pondicherry and Indochina, were they issued by the Vichy France government or the Free French of General de Gaulle? I'm not so sure. I have no idea. I was in Far East for some years, and
I don't think the Pondicherry Bank de l'Indochine was not purview to the Vichy France, but there are
Correct.
certain banknotes which were issued by the Vichy regimes,
the world-
particularly
yeah.
in North Africa.
Yeah.
But there were also the other sort of the peripheral banks were all taken over by France Libre.
Correct.
So they have those it's not État Français. It's
No,
the
no.
France
Yeah,
Libre
yeah.
aspect. So they do have the Charles de Gaulle faction.
Yeah, France Libre, yeah.
And there are basically interesting designs which were made in New Caledonia, French Polynesia, Tahiti, also in French Equatorial Africa.
Yeah.
So those are the means that I can think immediately of, which were by France Libre.
And the printing of the notes, many of these notes was done in Saigon. That's where they took it over, and a series was printed out through Saigon.
My name is Sanjay Garg, and question is to Basil and Shalin. Thank you. I mean, it was a revelation for me, at least, that how the names of designers and the sketch makers and the engravers are visible and prominently displayed. And I remember, at one point in time, I was a member of the design team of RBI. And we do have, when we were looking at different design, there's a design statement. And much of the conjectures that we were making, that what the artist might have intended to convey, it is all there specified and given in the design statement. So I was wondering whether in the French archives any such details are available about these artists, engravers, and so yeah.
Yes, definitely. I was as part of my own research, I was in contact with this gentleman called Arnaud Manas, who's a historian of Banque de France. And they have not only the correspondences, but also the whole runs of artworks that these artists have made. But what is also interesting here is that these artists that we just talked about a very few ones. I think altogether there are 60 or 70 artists who are involved historically, if you see the last 100 years of history of these designs. And as I said, we are lucky that we have their names on the banknotes. We can actually backtrack. There is correspondence, but most of these, the artists that they were requisitioning for this purpose was also from, they were not these famous liberated artists, because they had to understand the functionality of money. And therefore, the artists that were drawn in were more of the workhorse artists who were teachers, who were academic practitioners of art, than any of these big names like Cézanne or Monet or anything of that sort. Of course, they were also in their own ways. They were also academicians, as it were. But these were more of the run-of-the-mill. How should I put it? As I said, the workhorse artists who were actually doing public art and public memorials and public art and those kind of things. And they were then requisitioned mainly for this. So.
But that question also has relevance in the sense that, I had scanned through the catalogs regarding that interpretation of that Marianne with the spear and the olive. Now, is it Marianne first and foremost? Then is it the spear and the olive leaf? Now that is not available in maybe the archives archives would have the details, but it's not really available in the.
That's what I was saying, that the numismatic catalogs are not really the points where you could find. They just describe. They would say, we are quite lucky that they don't describe Gandhi as a bald man with glasses. So but that's what there is. They would just describe what they show. A woman carrying a bottle or something like that. So. Yeah.
Oh, adding to that, there is a description. I'm not sure which website it is of. Basically, as a collector, I go on it, but they are dealers, and one of the initial banknotes of India has got the three-headed lion pillar. So, I mean, I understand you can't see the fourth one, but they haven't bothered to look at what it means. So, yeah, they're surely not looking beyond that image. Forget going to the archives. Yeah.
I'm Usha Vijayalakshmi. Hi. My congratulations to all the speakers. My question is to the first speaker. You had shown the banknote where the French woman and the native woman is projected on an equal footing. But I read what is written in Tamil. And according to present standard, it is not actually very respectfully written. So my question is, that there is a difference in perception between the artist and the government, how they perceive natives.
That was precisely the question which we raised over there, that whether those were the intended messages, or was it the artist surreptitiously bringing in artist resistance? So ostensibly, it is that, well, the values of liberty, equality, fraternity, it's representing one of the values over there of liberty, which again, I think about the notes which Shailendra had shown. You had the three, there was the white woman flanked by two in virtually equal measure. So there's this ostensible projection. But was it, over here in this case, was it the artist which brought in artist resistance, knowing that no way were the colonizers and the colonized equal. No way were they, treated without oppression. There wasn't oppression over there. So, what exactly did the Tamil say?
Yes.
To the bearer of this. To the porter.
To the bearer of this note. I couldn't read it because it moved very fast. But it says like oven, which is not used. Like you, when you talk about an individual, you actually address them respectfully. Here it is little disrespectful. So because they are natives. So it is there in the note.
But that is more the sort of clause about the bearer.
But when you write in Tamil, you have to actually mention he, and that he is not respectful. Now we won't write like that.
So like Basil said, that was the gap between the artist and the final issuing authority that kind of put that information in. Yeah.
Two questions for Dr. Rai. About weaponization of knowledge, if you could elaborate a bit, because one can understand coercion by knowledge, one can understand misleading and misguiding, but what if you could elaborate a bit on that? And the next one would be, did you also mean that China was did you mean that China was, along with India, China was also influenced by Greek culture? Did you mean that?
Thank you for those questions. Yes, weaponization of knowledge is the whole way in which the intellectual hierarchies were created about differences of knowledge, differences of cultures. So, for example, what is on the top? It's Greek culture. There's nothing, that's the pristine, that's the best. And after that, there are all these hierarchies. So, for example, India gets its stone architecture only when the Greeks come to or impact India on its, which we know today is incorrect. But we are talking about the 19th and 20th centuries. And of course, even today, you will read a lot about how Greek culture impacted Indian architecture and so on. And just as Greek culture impacted India, Indian culture then spread to Southeast Asia. So all these monuments were built thanks to cultural diffusion from India. And the people who wrote about it were really the French, who started the Greater India Society. A lot of Indians were members of this Greater India Society and also followed. And this is something which we still write about today. So that's certainly a trajectory, and the ways in which different cultures are hierarchized is what I meant when I said the weaponization of knowledge. Mm-hmm. And the second point is, who was showing it? That was you. No, Najaf was showing that. See, Alexander is a fascinating character, right? Alexander is Greek, yes. We know all about that. But the Alexander romance and the stories of Alexander were translated, survived in many, many languages, including Persian. And in Persian, Alexander is really a friend of the prophet, and he goes under the ocean in a sort of see-through, like a submarine, to explore the ocean. So there are many, many stories. And China, as India, also believed that a lot of Greek influence, the Silk Road, remember, the Silk Road connects China to the Mediterranean. And that through the Silk Road, a lot of Greek influence certainly reached China and had an impact on its art history. But in the context of Southeast Asia, in the context of Indochina, it's China and India which are impacting these local cultures.
When we see Gandhara art, for example, we know it's a clear-cut influence. Do we have an example?
We can talk about it all evening. So, okay, I don't know if I should answer that. It'll take all evening. But my straight, see, one of the things that we don't do, and this I think goes back to why we don't look at archives to see what the artist meant. Now, when we're looking at Gandharan art, what we don't do is who made the collection and what did they collect? Did they collect everything? Did they collect some things? Right? And did they collect only Buddhist things? I can give you any number of examples where there is a choice that was made. And that's exactly. So finally what you collect, whether you collect Greek, whether you collect a Buddha looking like Apollo, depends on, have you then missed out the 200 other Buddhas which didn't look like Apollo? Or did you only collect that one which looked like Apollo? And then you have Gandharan art, because that's what was attractive, not the others. So there is a choice which is going into, into all of this.
And the rest of it is out of syllabus. I borrowed that from one of my other speakers. Yeah, the rest of that discussion goes out of syllabus, not today.
Not today.
But thank you all for patiently being here. And hopefully we'll have a few more things coming your way. And we'll see you then. Yeah, thanks.